Welcome to the Urban Herald, where our mission is really to cut through the noise and deliver some profound insights into the stories shaping our world.
That's right.
Today we're taking a deep dive into a powerful piece from our own reporting here at the Herald. It uncovers a crucial and often uncomfortable truth within the LGBTQ plus community.
It's definitely a topic that demands our full attention, especially now during Pride Month 2025. We're talking about internalized homophobia and the really complex ways it can manifest as judgment, specifically against gender nonconformity, but within LGBTQ plus spaces themselves.
Exactly. You might think that after fighting for so long against external prejudice, our communities would be, immune to it internally.
Right, like a safe haven.
Yeah, but as our recent article, Internalized Homophobia, How LGBTQ plus Communities Judge Gender Nonconformity, reveals, it's this paradox that can actually weaken us from within.
It really can.
So today, we'll be exploring the historical roots of this issue, looking at its painful impact, and discussing some concrete steps we can all take to build truly inclusive communities.
Yeah.
Let's unpack this crucial conversation from the Urban Herald.
Okay.
So to really grasp this paradox, we need to understand our history. And here's where it gets really interesting.
It does, because many of the figures often overlooked, maybe in more sanitized historical narratives, were actually the vanguards of our liberation, the ones really pushing the boundaries.
Absolutely.
What's fascinating here is that foundational moment, the Stonewall riots, June '69. The reporting and historical accounts show it was predominantly led by Black and Puerto Rican drag queens, transgender women, butch lesbians.
Yeah. Figures we know now, like Marsha P. Johnson, Sylvia Rivera.
Exactly. Their courage was incredible. And their organization, Star Street Transvestites Action Revolutionaries, they even provided housing for homeless queer youth.
Which is amazing.
It is. But it raises that important question. Why aren't these gender nonconforming individuals always centered in our historical memory? Why the erasure sometimes?
It really speaks to what our Urban Herald piece calls the visibility paradox.
Yeah.
These individuals, just by being their authentic selves, their gender expression made them vulnerable targets, yes, but also incredibly powerful symbols of resistance.
Yeah, both things at once.
Yeah. Think about butch lesbians in the 50s and 60s, wearing masculine attire despite, immense personal risk, jobs, safety.
Huge risks. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it highlights what's sometimes called passing privilege.
Right.
The idea that those who could blend into heteronormative society maybe did so for survival. Understandable, perhaps.
Sure.
But it meant the most visible, the most gender nonconforming were the ones really pushing for change, often bearing the brunt of the backlash.
And that created this sort of unconscious hierarchy.
Sort of, yeah. And sadly, it seems to persist today, where maybe feminine-presenting lesbians or, masculine-presenting gay men might experience less discrimination within the community than their gender nonconforming counterparts.
Subtle.
Very subtle, but it's an insidious form of discrimination within our own ranks.
Which brings us right to that uncomfortable truth, how societal homophobia infiltrates our own community.
Yeah, gets inside the walls.
Our article describes internalized homophobia as this unconscious absorption of society's negative attitudes. It leads to self-directed prejudice sometimes, but also judging others in the community.
It's like a virus, as you said, infecting the very cells meant to fight it. We absorb these messages growing up.
And this can lead to what's known as respectability politics.
Yes. That desire within LGBTQ plus spaces sometimes to gain acceptance from the mainstream.
How? By distancing the community from its quote-unquote radical elements.
Exactly. Think back to the Mattachine Society in the 1950s. Their strategy was to present homosexuals as, non-threatening.
Understandable for the era, maybe.
Perhaps understandable in such a hostile time, yeah. But the cost, our reporting suggests, is sacrificing authentic representation for a kind of sanitized image. You end up marginalizing the very people who often sparked the change.
And these internal biases, they often mirror traditional gender hierarchies, don't they? Masculinity is still valued over femininity.
It seems so. Our reporting frequently hears stories, anecdotes, of effeminate gay men being rejected for being too femme, even within gay dating pools.
Right.
And research points to this stemming from, both hegemonic masculinity, that dominant idea of what a man should be, and also this heightened masculinity consciousness within the community itself.
So it's layered.
Very layered. At the same time, butch lesbians face their own unique challenges. They're often wrongly accused of having masculine privilege,
Despite experiencing gender-based discrimination.
both inside and outside the community. And historically, even the lesbian feminist movement in the 70s sometimes discouraged butch-femme relationships, saw them as replicating heterosexual dynamics.
Wow. So that historical rejection adds another layer.
It contributes to ongoing marginalization, yeah. What really stands out to me here is how these internal biases, they're not just about personal preference, are they? They're about perpetuating broader societal norms.
That's a crucial point. And this is also where intersectionality becomes so vital. Our Urban Herald team consistently finds that discrimination isn't a single experience.
Yeah, it's compounded.
Exactly.
Right.
Black transgender women, for instance, face disproportionate violence and exclusion.
Oh.
Working-class gender non-conforming individuals might lack access to supportive resources.
Right. The intersection of gender expression with race, class, other identities, it creates these additional compounded layers of discrimination, makes people even more vulnerable.
So let's talk about the impact. The consequences of this internal judgment aren't just theoretical, are they?
Not at all. They are profoundly felt by real people, which raises that important question.
Yeah.
What's the actual harm here? What does this do?
Well, first, there's a devastating mental health toll. That comes through loud and clear in the research. Studies show strong correlations between internalized homophobia and things like depression, anxiety, even suicidal ideation among LGBTQ+ individuals.
That's heavy.
It is. Our Urban Herald team recently highlighted a report from Belong To, that's an Irish LGBTQ+ youth organization. It really emphasized how crucial community acceptance is for well-being.
Absolutely crucial.
But if that community, the place you turn to for safety, is also a source of rejection based on your gender expression, the impact can be incredibly profound, deeply isolating.
And connecting this to the bigger picture, again, these internal divisions, they significantly weaken our collective power, don't they?
Hugely. When resources, leadership opportunities, visibility, when those things get concentrated among those deemed more respectable or conforming,
then the movement loses that radical edge. It loses the diversity of voices that actually made historical progress possible.
Yeah, like GLA pointed out recently, unified advocacy is more critical than ever. We see these legislative attacks, especially targeting transgender rights, for 2024-2025.
We absolutely do. And we can't fight effectively externally if we're divided internally. It fragments our strength.
And finally, there's the historical erasure we touched on. Sanitizing our history. It sidelines the contributions of gender nonconforming pioneers.
Disconnects us from our roots.
Completely. Thinking about that rejection of pre-Stonewall culture, like butch-femme relationships, drag performance, it's a loss of cultural knowledge, of identity.
And that loss perpetuates contemporary discrimination. It makes it easier to marginalize people today if you erase their historical significance.
We lose sight of who really built this movement. Okay, that's the problem. The history, the impact. What does this all mean for us now? How do we, as the Urban Herald team tries to explore, and as a community, how do we move forward?
Right, because the article doesn't just diagnose the problem, it outlines actionable steps, paths toward transformation, both individual and community-wide.
Which is hopeful.
It is, and what's fascinating here is that it really begins with a robust, unflinching look at our own history, properly.
No more sanitizing.
Exactly. Comprehensive education about LGBTQ plus history has to center the contributions of gender non-conforming folks, the leadership of drag queens, trans women at Stonewall, the courage of butch lesbians.
Making that connection explicit. Current freedoms are a direct result of their sacrifices.
Precisely. It grounds us. And then it calls for honest self-reflection individually.
Which isn't easy.
No, it's not about guilt, though. The piece stresses it's about growth, identifying our own biases about gender expression, because we all absorb societal messages.
So acknowledging that conditioning.
Yes. Support groups, peer education, these can help facilitate those conversations safely.
And beyond just tolerating difference.
Way beyond tolerance, our Urban Herald article stresses actively celebrating the full spectrum of gender expression.
What does that look like in practice?
It means things like inclusive programming, ensuring leadership opportunities are genuinely open to gender nonconforming individuals, actively challenging discriminatory language when we hear it.
Making sure safe spaces are truly safe. For everyone.
For everyone. That's the key.
Okay, so our Urban Herald team proposed this kind of action plan. Let's break that down a bit. Immediate actions.
Right. Individually. That self-reflection we mentioned, education, challenging stereotypes you see or hear, active allyship.
And community level.
Things like inclusive event programming, making sure platforms are shared so GNC individuals can speak for themselves, having clear anti-discrimination policies in groups, maybe mentorship programs.
Okay, that's immediate, then medium-term goals.
Thinking a bigger picture, organizational reform, like leadership diversity mandates, sensitivity training, making sure resources actually get prioritized for the most marginalized members.
Building that into the structure.
Exactly.
Fair
And
enough.
culturally, things like media representation campaigns, more community dialogues on these tough topics, really embedding intersectional approaches and focusing on youth programs.
And long-term, the big vision.
Systemic transformation. Policy advocacy that centers the most marginalized, more research, coalition building with other groups fighting oppression.
And making it sustainable.
Yes, cultural competency becomes standard. Real accountability mechanisms, ensuring resources are sustainable, and protecting the legacy, remembering the radical roots.
That's a comprehensive approach.
It has to be, right? Because the report highlights that change often starts at the grassroots, supporting organizations that specifically serve gender non-conforming people, trans community centers, for example. That strengthens everyone.
And facilitating those difficult conversations.
With skilled facilitation,
Yeah.
focusing on healing, not just blame.
And accountability. Clear policies.
Absolutely. Clear anti-discrimination policies that are actually enforced.
So as we move forward from Pride 2025 and beyond, it feels like, as the Urban Herald suggests, the LGBTQ plus community is at a crossroads.
It really does.
But
will we fully embrace the gender nonconforming pioneers who built this movement and who continue to push its boundaries? Or will these internal divisions keep holding us back?
Yeah.
And this raises, I think, an important question for you, our listener. Given everything we're seeing, the ongoing legislative attacks on trans rights, on gender-affirming care, attacks targeting the very populations who led our fight,
The same groups.
the very same groups, how can we collectively ensure that solidarity and mutual support become paramount, not just nice ideas, but essential for our survival and progress? True liberation, as our Urban Herald report emphasizes, means full acceptance and equal participation for all, especially our most marginalized members, not just when it's easy.
It's a simple truth, isn't it? But it's so complex to actually implement.
It's deeply complex.
But one we have to commit to. Our liberation really is bound together.
It absolutely is.
We hope this deep dive has offered you not just information, but maybe some inspiration too, to challenge internal biases, support diverse voices, and help build that truly inclusive future. Thank you for joining us on the Urban Herald.